So I did tell you that I used to be crazy. And this next story is going to prove my point, I think. But the reason I tell you this story is because it relates to some events in my life where I discovered some things that were really pivotal in my own recovery. So for reasons that are entirely to do with the level of anxiety and my lack of skill in dealing with that anxiety at that time, I was living out of a van in the northern Midwest, in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And during that time, so many things became so profoundly triggering for me that life became almost unbearable. And even some of the simplest and most necessary tasks of life became almost impossible for me to do. And one of those was obtaining food. So, to give you a few examples of the things that used to be very triggering for me, and I'm going to tell you these things, but let me preface this by saying that if you are possibly triggered by any of these things, please bear with me, because I promise you that it's just thoughts and it will be okay. So I used to be triggered deeply, painfully, by Walmart. Just the thought of Walmart. Just the thought of McDonald's. Just the thought of sugar. Just 3 examples. Now, you think about this for a second. It's very difficult in today's day and age to travel any significant distance without encountering something that will have something to do with one of those 3 things. Particularly traveling anywhere to go to get food. So you can understand that in all of my endeavors to obtain food, it became increasingly challenging for me to find something that would not provoke intense anxiety. So oftentimes I would seek out food, I would arrive at a store, and I would then, for one reason or another, become so anxious that I would abandon that attempt. And instead, I would move on to the next store. Now, my criteria was so rigid that I ended up oftentimes traveling literally hundreds of miles a day in search of food. And many times, I would be unable to find anything that would meet my rigid criteria, and so I would go to sleep hungry and just hope that the next day I would be able to overcome that in some way. Now, I'll give you an example of what would happen. So I would start, let's say, in the morning. I would seek out food. I would have in mind a store that I was going to go to. I would travel to that store. I would go into the store, let's say, and once I got into that store, over the intercom system, they would be playing music, and perhaps they would be playing that song, you know, how did it go? The "You're My Candy Girl" song, you know, da 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 da, sugar sugar, you know that song. Okay, so that song would then provoke anxiety, and I would run out of the store, get back into my van, and drive on to the next store. Now, when I would get into the next store, I would discover that on display, right as I walked in, was sugar. So I would then turn around and I would leave. I'd go to the next place, and that would be right next to a Walmart. Or it would be right next to a McDonald's, or it would be right next to a Coca-Cola bottling plant. Any number of things that would be tremendously triggering. Now, what I discovered was that it was an amazing phenomenon that happened over and over and over. Every time that I would abandon one thing due to anxiety and move on into another, the next thing would end up being worse than the one that I had just left. And then I would leave that one and I'd move on to the next one, and the next one would be even worse. So with each successive thing that I moved on to in an attempt to try to get away from the anxiety, I would end up with more anxiety. And by the end of the day, my head would be spinning just with multiple obsessions. I couldn't even keep track of it all. I would pray for sleep, but I couldn't even sleep because I was so tense and so stressed. And I was hungry. So what I discovered during this time was it just gets worse the longer I let it go on. So the key is to stop now. I'll say that again. The key is to stop now. Because you see, the strategy to try to deal with the problem turns out to be the problem. The problem that I imagined was imaginary. Does it really matter if a song plays over the intercom? Does it really matter if sugar is on display? Does it really matter if it's next to a Walmart? Does it really matter if it's next to a McDonald's? Does it really matter if the cashier is eating a Big Mac? Of course it doesn't. But I had an imaginary problem. And then I came up with strategies to try to solve that imaginary problem. And it turns out that the strategies themselves are the actual problem. Candy Girl playing so that I can hear it is not actually a problem. My problem was that I was hungry because I didn't allow myself to get food. Because I heard that. My problem was that I would allow myself to continue to allow the obsessing to go on and on and on, giving attention to it, trying to do something with it, trying to get away from it, trying to get rid of it. The problem was the strategies. So the key to success is realizing that your strategies are the problem and that you have to stop. So what I discovered is that ironically, the only hope is to abandon all hope in everything that is known. All of the known strategies, all the strategies that the mind can devise, that the mind can come up with, because all of those strategies are trying to solve a non-existent problem. It's all fiction. It's not reality. So that is my story of me living in a van, seeking out food, going hungry, being anxious, being stressed out, finding more and more things to worry about. And that's the other thing, is when it started, years and years and years ago, the obsessions were in comparison, were nothing. Nothing at all. And so it was that I let it go on for longer and longer and longer until it built up more and more and more. But where did it build up? It built up inside of me. It wasn't anything else outside of me. It was me. It was within me that the problem was being created and generated. So the principle that I discovered is stop now. Wherever you are, however long it's been going on, whether it's a minute, 10 minutes, a day, a week, or a lifetime, stop now. Commit to stopping now. And if you forget, then as soon as you remember, stop now again. because the peace is available right now.